He was the man who could tame any beast. But when a violent storm brought the mountainside crashing down, trapping him in the ruins of his own barn, the master became the victim. His only hope for survival now rested on the one creature as wild and as strong as the storm itself, the horse he once called Regret. 2 years had passed since the rodeo that had changed everything. The McDowell Younger Ranch was a beacon of prosperity, a testament to the hard work of Cole and the savvy management of his wife, Sarah. The ghosts of the past had been laid to rest, replaced by the joyful laughter of their 1-year-old son, Jamie, a boy with his father's quiet strength and his mother's kind eyes. Cole was a man transformed. The haunted, broken-down cowboy was gone, replaced by a loving husband and a proud father, his heart finally at peace. And then there was redemption. The giant black stallion, once a symbol of untamable grief, was now the soul of the ranch. He was no longer just an animal. He was a friend, a guardian. He followed young Jamie around the yard with a gentle, watchful eye, a massive, silent protector for the small boy. The bond between Cole and the horse was a thing of legend in the valley. They moved as one, a partnership built not on ropes and spurs, but on a deep, almost mystical understanding. Cole had not broken the horse's spirit. He had made a pact with it. He had healed the horse's wildness, and in doing so, had healed himself. They were two sides of the same coin, two spirits forged in the same fire of tragedy and reborn in the quiet peace of this new life. But the peace of the frontier is a fragile thing. The threat, when it came, was not from the cruelty of men, but from the raw, indifferent fury of nature. It started as a dark line on the western horizon, a bruise on the perfect blue sky. Within an hour, the sky had turned a sickly, greenish black. The wind began to howl, not with the familiar voice of a winter storm, but with a new, terrifying scream, the sound of a twister. Panic erupted. Sarah grabbed Jamie, rushing him into the safety of the storm cellar beneath the main house. Cole, his face grim and set, ran for the barns. The livestock, spooked by the sudden drop in pressure and the eerie light, were wild with terror. His first thought was for redemption. He found the great stallion rearing and kicking in his stall, the old, untamable fire back in his eyes. Cole, with a calm authority that only he possessed, managed to soothe the terrified horse, speaking to him in low, steady murmurs. He was just about to lead him out of the main barn, the oldest and largest structure on the ranch, when the full force of the storm hit. The sound was a deafening, explosive roar, a combination of a freight train and a cannon blast. The world outside the barn doors vanished into a swirling vortex of dirt and debris. The ancient oak tree that had stood for 100 years was ripped from the ground as if it were a weed. Cole felt the very foundations of the barn begin to shake. He shoved redemption towards the reinforced back of the stall, a desperate, instinctual move to protect the animal. He heard a sound like the world splitting in two, a high, piercing scream of wood and metal giving way. He looked up. The massive, 100-foot-long main support beam of the barn, a timber as thick as his own body, was splintering, cracking, falling directly towards him. He had no time to run, no time to even cry out. The world dissolved into a chaos of splintering wood, crushing weight, and then a sudden, absolute darkness. The storm, in a single, brutal moment, had brought the mountain down. Silence. A heavy, dust-choked silence that was deeper and more terrifying than the storm's fury. Then, a sound. A pained, desperate whinny from the back of the wreckage. Redemption was alive. Cole's final, desperate shove had sent him into the most structurally sound corner of the stall, which had, miraculously, held. He was trapped, but he was largely unharmed. He struggled to his feet, his massive body trembling, not from the cold, but from sheer adrenaline and terror. Dust and the smell of splintered pine filled his nostrils. He was surrounded by a tangled, chaotic mess of what was once a familiar barn. His first instinct, the ancient, wild instinct passed down through 1,000 generations of untamed ancestors, was to flee. To break through the wreckage and run, to seek the open spaces where there was no weight, no confinement, no danger. He could feel the call of the wild mountains, a powerful magnetic pull. He took a step towards a gap in the collapsed wall, the gray, rain-swept world outside a promise of freedom. But then he stopped. A different instinct, a newer but far more powerful one, held him rooted to the spot. Loyalty. A bond forged not by ropes, but by a quiet voice, a gentle hand, and a shared understanding of a broken soul. Cole? His master, his partner, his friend? Where was Cole? Redemption's mission began. It was not a mission of thought, but of pure, unwavering instinct. He lowered his great head, his senses on high alert. He could smell him. The familiar, comforting scent of worn leather, sweat, and something else, something sharp and wrong. Blood. The scent was coming from the center of the wreckage, from beneath a mountain of splintered beams and collapsed haylofts. He began to work, his initial panic replaced by a focused, intelligent desperation. He used his massive head and powerful shoulders to nudge smaller pieces of debris aside. He tested larger beams with his hooves, backing away when the pile shifted dangerously. Sarah, from the cellar of the main house, could hear the sounds: the thud of hooves, the scrape of wood, the occasional, frustrated snort. She thought it was just the storm settling the wreckage. She had no idea a rescue mission was already underway. Redemption worked for what felt like an eternity. He was not just a dumb animal blindly thrashing. He was a creature of the wild, and he understood the unforgiving logic of a rock slide, of a deadfall. He moved with a purpose that was both beautiful and heartbreaking to behold. He uncovered a saddle, then a broken pitchfork, his search growing more frantic. But the further he dug, the more he realized the futility of his task. The main beam pinning his master was too large, too heavy. He could not move it alone. He could not save him. The wild instinct returned, a whisper of despair. Run, flee, save yourself. He backed away from the pile, his great chest heaving, a sound of pure anguish rumbling in his throat. He looked at the gap in the wall again, at the promise of freedom. But then he looked back at the pile of debris, at the place where the scent of his master was strongest. And his loyalty, the bond that Cole had so patiently forged with whispered confessions and gentle hands, won the final battle. If he could not save him with strength, he would save him with intelligence. His mission changed. It was no longer to dig. It was to get help. With a final, determined roar that echoed through the ruined barn, Redemption turned. He did not run for the mountains. He navigated a treacherous path through the debris, squeezed through the gap in the wall, and galloped out into the pouring rain. His powerful hooves churned the mud, his black coat sleek with water. He was no longer running from a memory of regret. He was running towards a hope of redemption, his every stride a prayer, a desperate, thundering message pounding across the rain-soaked earth, a message intended for one person alone. Sarah. Inside the storm cellar, Sarah held her son, Jamie, close, listening to the terrifying symphony of the storm overhead. After the initial, deafening roar, an eerie silence had fallen, broken only by the sound of the wind and the pouring rain. She told herself that Cole was safe, that he was an experienced rancher who knew how to weather any storm, that he was probably waiting it out in the reinforced section of the new barn. But a cold, gnawing dread was beginning to coil in her stomach. He should have come to check on them by now. When the wind finally died down to a manageable howl, she could wait no longer. Leaving Jamie asleep in the cellar, she emerged into a world of devastation. The great oak tree was gone, fences were shattered. But it was the sight of the main barn, the oldest and largest on the property, that made her blood run cold. It was not a building anymore. It was a tomb, a tangled, splintered mountain of wood and collapsed roofing. Cole. His name was a strangled cry on her lips. She ran towards the wreckage, her boots sinking in the deep mud, screaming his name over and over. But the only answer was the relentless drumming of the rain. Panic, cold and absolute, seized her. He was in there. She knew it. She began to tear at the splintered wood with her bare hands, her efforts useless against the immense weight of the debris. She was alone, helpless, screaming into a storm that didn't care. It was then that she heard it, the thunder of approaching hooves. Through the gray curtain of rain, a massive, black shape galloped towards her. It was Redemption. He was alone, his black coat matted with mud and rain, a fresh, bloody gash on his flank. He skidded to a stop in front of her, his eyes wild, his great chest heaving. Sarah's first thought was one of pure terror. The horse had gone wild, broken free in the storm. Had he trampled Cole? Was he the cause of this? But then she looked closer. She saw not madness in his eyes, but a desperate, intelligent urgency. He whinnied, a sharp, piercing sound, and nudged her hard with his head, pushing her away from the wreckage. He was trying to tell her something. This was the turning point. She had a choice, to give in to her panic, or to trust the creature her husband loved, the creature whose spirit she knew was as deep and as complex as Cole's own. She chose to trust. She took a deep breath, forcing the hysteria down, and looked at the horse, truly looked at him, searching for clues. She saw the gash on his side, a wound not from a simple fall, but from splintered wood. She saw the direction he had come from, not the open pasture, but from the heart of the collapsed barn. He nudged her again, more insistently this time, then turned and took a few steps back towards the wreckage, before looking back at her, a clear, "Follow me" gesture. Her heart pounded. He wasn't just agitated. He was showing her where Cole was. But then, he did something even more startling. He left the wreckage and trotted over to the outside wall of the bunkhouse, where Cole's heavy work rifle hung in a leather scabbard, protected from the rain. He nudged the rifle with his muzzle, the metal clanging softly. The message was chillingly clear. Cole is in danger. You need to come, and you need to be armed. Sarah finally understood the full, terrible picture. Cole was trapped, and there was another threat besides the wreckage. A wolf, a bear, a cougar, drawn by the scent of blood. She didn't know, but she knew Redemption was not just a messenger. He was a guardian, calling for backup. A new, cold resolve washed over her. She would not be a helpless victim. She was a rancher's wife. She was Cole Younger's wife. She ran to the bunkhouse, grabbed the heavy rifle, and checked its load. She then ran to Redemption's side, her eyes meeting the horse's intelligent gaze. They were no longer a woman and a horse. They were a team on a desperate rescue mission, and the horse was leading the way. Following a horse on a rescue mission felt like a fever dream, but Sarah trusted her gut, and she trusted Redemption. The great stallion moved with a newfound purpose, no longer frantic, but with the focused, ground-eating stride of a man on a mission. He did not lead her directly back to the collapsed barn. Instead, he took a longer, more circuitous route, leading her up a slippery, muddy game trail that wound its way to the high ridge overlooking the entire homestead. Sarah struggled to keep up, her mind racing. Why was he taking her this way? The barn was below them, to the east. This path was leading them west, away from it. Her initial theory of a predatory animal began to crumble. A wolf or a bear would be at the site of the prey, not waiting on a high trail. A new, colder fear began to creep into her heart. What if the threat was something else entirely? They reached the top of the ridge. From this vantage point, hidden by a thicket of rain-soaked pines, they could see the entire scene below, the ruined barn, the main house, and the muddy trail that led back towards town. And then, she saw it, and her blood ran cold. Hidden in a small grove of cottonwood trees, just off the main trail, were two horses, saddled and tied. And near them, taking cover from the rain, were two men. They were not neighbors. They were rough, hard-looking men, their faces shadowed by the brims of their hats. And they were watching the collapsed barn, their rifles held ready. They were not a rescue party. They were scavengers. Or worse. The horrifying truth of the situation hit Sarah with the force of a physical blow. This was the plot twist. Pike, the vengeful ranch hand her father had fired. He had heard about the storm, and he had come back, not for a fair fight, but to take advantage of the chaos. He and his crony were not there by accident. They were waiting. They knew Cole was likely trapped, injured, and helpless. They were waiting for her to find him, and then they would move in to finish the job and loot the ranch. Redemption had sensed them. With his preternatural animal senses, he had detected the hidden threat, the smell of strange horses, the scent of men who did not belong. He hadn't just led her to Cole. He had led her on a path that avoided the ambush. The horse was not just a messenger. He was a brilliant strategist, a silent guardian who had outmaneuvered the human predators. From their hidden position on the ridge, Sarah could see Cole now, a small, barely visible shape pinned in the wreckage. He was alive, stirring weakly, but she was trapped. If she went down to help him, Pike and his man would see her immediately. They would be caught between the wreckage and the ambush. If she did nothing, Cole would surely die from his injuries or the cold. She looked at the massive, intelligent horse beside her. He stood perfectly still, his ears pricked, his gaze fixed on the men below. He seemed to be waiting for her command, for her plan. The fear in her heart was now forged into a cold, hard anger. These men, these vultures, were going to pay. She was not just the rancher's wife anymore. She was the leader of this rescue. And her only ally was a giant black stallion who had just proven he was the smartest soul on this mountain, next to Cole himself. She began to formulate a desperate, dangerous plan. Sarah's mind, sharpened by years of managing the ranch's logistics, worked quickly. She could not fight two armed men head-on. She had to use the terrain, the storm, and their own arrogance against them. Her gaze fell upon a steep, muddy slope covered in loose rock and debris from the storm, located directly above the grove where Pike and his man were hiding. An idea, dangerous and desperate, began to form. This was her all-in moment. She checked her rifle one last time. Then she turned to Redemption. She spoke to him in a low, urgent whisper, her voice a mixture of a plea and a command, pointing down towards the slope, then towards the men. The great horse, as if understanding her intent, let out a low, rumbling nicker, his dark eyes intelligent and focused. She then did something that defied all logic of self-preservation. She moved to a more visible spot on the ridge and fired a single shot from her rifle, not at the men, but into the air, in the opposite direction, as if signaling a non-existent rescue party. Pike and his man reacted instantly, just as she knew they would. They cursed, realizing they had lost the element of surprise, and spurred their horses out from the cover of the grove, intending to rush the barn and finish Cole before any help could arrive. They were now completely exposed on the open ground below the muddy, unstable slope. It was the signal Redemption had been waiting for. With a thunderous, terrifying roar that seemed to shake the very mountains, the giant black stallion charged. He did not charge down the trail. He launched his massive body directly down the steep, muddy slope. His hooves, as large as dinner plates, tore into the loose earth and rock. He was not just a horse, he was a living avalanche. The sound was apocalyptic. A cascade of mud, rock, and debris, dislodged by the horse's powerful charge, thundered down the slope. Pike and his man looked up in horror, their horses rearing in terror. They were caught directly in the path of the man-made landslide. The landslide wasn't large enough to bury them, but it was a chaotic, terrifying force of nature. Pike and his man were thrown from their spooked horses, landing in a painful heap of mud and rock. Their rifles were lost, and their will to fight was completely shattered by the terrifying sight of the demon horse that had seemingly commanded the earth itself to attack them. Bruised, battered, and utterly defeated, they scrambled to their feet and fled into the woods on foot, their ambush a humiliating failure. As the last of the rocks tumbled to a stop, Sarah didn't waste a moment. She scrambled down the trail to the ruined barn. Cole was still pinned, but conscious, having witnessed the entire, incredible event from his trap position. Working together, Sarah and a now calm Redemption managed to use a system of ropes and the horse's immense strength to finally shift the massive beam just enough for Cole to drag himself free. As Sarah tended to Cole's injuries, Redemption stood over them, a silent, powerful guardian, his great head lowered, gently nudging his master's hand. In that moment, they were no longer a man, a woman, and a horse. They were a family, a team of survivors who had faced down human cruelty and nature's fury, and had won. 6 months later, the McDowell Younger Ranch was slowly being reborn from the ruins. The town, hearing the story of the ambush and Redemption's incredible heroism, had rallied around them, offering help and supplies. Pike and his gang, identified by Cole, were captured by the sheriff and brought to justice. Cole's recovery was long and difficult, but he was never alone. He had Sarah by his side, and his loyal, four-legged hero was never far away. One crisp morning, as they stood watching the great horse, Sarah told Cole that he had once named the horse Regret to symbolize his own past. But now, she said, that name no longer fit. Cole smiled, a genuine, happy smile. He agreed. He had once looked at the horse and saw a reflection of his own pain. Now, he looked at him and saw a reflection of his own family. Strong, resilient, and bound by an unbreakable loyalty. The horse was no longer a symbol of regret or even redemption. He was a hero. And that, Cole knew, was the only name he ever needed. If this story of loyalty and courage moved you, click the video on your screen now for another unforgettable tale from the Wild West. Don't forget to subscribe and tell us what you thought of Redemption's bravery in the comments below.